This is the most American story in the world, and it hits every salacious detail because we know how filthy behind the counter or behind the curtain is. We know that the richest people out there get away with everything in our current community.
However, during that first 10-year period, there were associations with many, many powerful individuals, and she certainly knows, so much. But again, she's an individual who has refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. She's always operated under, an air of mystery. Right before she went on the lam, she showed off a book related to the CIA and a photograph after Jeffrey Epstein's death. Her father, Robert Maxwell, the Fleet Street publisher, was said to be an operative of the Israeli government. So she brings in a lot of espionage and
I get you.
Possible.
Very layered. How many victims are there?
Well, we know that more than 200 victims applied to the Victims Compensation Fund. That, there was really hard work done by Denise George, who was the district attorney down the Virgin Islands, where Epstein had his home. And she really forced the executors of his estate to set up a victims compensation fund. More than 200 women applied to that, and the Epstein's estate paid out more than $150 million. We also know, of course, based on Denise's work, that the two banks, JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank, also set up compensation funds and had to pay out over $300 million. So more than 250 women have applied and received compensation. But I estimate that there's probably a couple hundred other women who are victims, who are, over Eastern Europe and in other locations, who we may never know the identities of these individuals and exactly what happened to them. You have to understand that after Jeffrey Epstein's slap on the wrist conviction down in Florida, he set up a different type of operation for himself. He had modeling fixers in Europe, in France, and elsewhere, ferry young women over to his island in the Virgin Islands, where he was kind of out of sight of investigators in the New York and Florida. So a lot of abuse took place in the years after that conviction, and these women were brought in by plane and sent back. And I estimate that probably at least 200 more women took part in kind of the second phase of Jeffrey Epstein's sick sex trafficking.
But the literally hundreds of women that came forward through the process, and as we were just talking about, there are hundreds of women that I believe were involved that never came forward due to fear, due to self-involvement, due to the anxiety, due to wondering what level of victimization they may or may not had. Not every one of these women was trafficked down to the Virgin Islands or New York City. These women were victimized at a variety of different levels throughout this criminal conspiracy. Yeah, and let me rip this bandage off here as well, and talking about how these women recovered. A victims compensation fund was formed, and it had many promises. One of the big concerns was, how much are these women going to realize? And unfortunately, at the conclusion of the victims compensation fund payout, the Jeffrey Epstein estate was left with hundreds of millions of dollars of assets. And the plaintiff's universe goes nuts because just with a couple of trials, those victims should have bankrupted Jeffrey Epstein's estate. And it's an absolute betrayal of the justice system that his estate is still packed with money, and it's money now that other entities are going after. The Victims Compensation Fund was a failure because it didn't give justice to these actual victims.
Did Epstein really take his own life? So the cameras aren't working, they're not searching. Is this just bad work by the folks on the inside? Is it purposefully not done? How can the public be convinced of what really happened here?
I really want to believe in the conspiracy theories. I really want to believe that there's an explanation. This is why he killed himself. Someone helped him kill himself. Someone may have been involved in murdering him. But I also know, having spent 25 years going in and out of big institutions like this, the SHU, yeah, it's higher security, but failed inspections every day. Watches that weren't made every day. Instructions not followed every single day. There are immunities from suing these facilities that basically, if you call attention to these problems, chronic problems, nothing gets done. It's why so many jails and prisons in America are under regular routine monitoring from the Department of Justice, from civil rights organizations, because these kind of problems exist in every facility. So if you're going to base the conspiracy that he didn't kill himself on the failures of underpaid guards, of a poorly run administration, and that dog don't hunt. It's absolutely possible, but I haven't seen anything that concludes it one way or another.
Barry Levine, your thoughts about the death of Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah, you have to understand, this was a man who loved controlling things. The temperature had to be set at a certain degree in his different estates, certain amount of towels for all of his massages. He was very exact and very specific with his staff. Everything was taken away from him in that jail cell. He couldn't get the right medication. He was eating his meals on the floor. He knew that he wasn't going to get the slap on the wrist this time that he had down in Florida, that he likely was going to be convicted and that he would face possible violence, during a jail sentence. I really think he decided to take his life. That was the last bit of control that he had. He also, very damaging documents to the case in the case came out 2 days before he changed his will. He was going through a situation where his cellmate had been moved out, and another one was going to come in that next day. He had really one night to do it, and I do believe that he took advantage of that and decided that he was going to go out on his own terms and take his life, because that was the last bit of control that he had in his life. Early on in the show, you talked about that contact list. Now, a lot of those individuals never actually met Jeffrey Epstein, but Jeffrey Epstein collected information about wealthy people from all different walks of life, from the science community to the entertainment community. He was in the banking community, his relationships with former President Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, Donald Trump early on in the 90s. You have to understand that he wanted to connect these individuals with other individuals, try to do favors for them. And along the way, he also attempted to blackmail individuals. As we know, Bill Gates, who there's no indication that Bill Gates ever took part in any specific wrongdoing, but he admitted that Jeffrey Epstein attempted to blackmail him about a relationship he had with an individual. So Jeffrey was always on the lookout for the ways to connect people and gain favors from the rich and powerful.
Josh Schiffer, we have about 15 seconds here. Will the public ever be satisfied?
No, absolutely not.
You know, the lack of trust in this case was born when prosecutors gave Epstein the deal of deals in 2008. Epstein then continued with his conduct, seemingly protected by those who were supposed to protect the victims. Why was that? That's the question that needs to be answered by the government through full transparency.